The first reboot was cancelled, but now there are rumors that Paramount is going to create a reboot, and we still assume that it is with the idea of making something aimed for a more mature audience as well, just like the previous reboot. This means that the new universe must have many changes, since it is not the same to make a series for a child audience and a series for adults. For a long time, we have talked about the suits of the Rangers, but the reality is that we have not yet talked about the style that the new series may have in general. During these 30 years, Power Rangers has had a pretty basic style due to the fact that it has always been a show aimed at a children's audience, and usually almost every season includes high tech. The entire style of this technology is clean, futuristic, and simple so that it is easy to understand. Obviously, this is something that is done so that kids can understand the entire concept of the show. But since the new series is likely to be aimed at young adults, then things can get more complicated. This is where the new style of the series comes in, and with this, we are not giving official information, but it is an idea that we assume, since it is what they should possibly do to achieve something better. If in the reboot they only change the story and the drama, then it is not going to look like a reboot. In order to achieve a real change, then they have to change the story and drama, but also the entire style of the series. In 2023 we were able to see the comics that Amy, the actress who plays Kimberly the Pink Ranger from Mighty Morphin, published based on a story in the future. The style we saw from this comic is that Jason is a lone hero, and we can see everything different about his suit. This suit has a different color cape. The suit has spots on it, and on his hands, he has a bandage. It's a style like he's been through a lot of battles, something a little bit darker, and more dramatic at the same time. Because of this, there are many designers who have been responsible for creating images on a style similar to this, and we can say that it looks spectacular. In this area we must highlight the artist Robbie Busby, who has created spectacular images with different styles. In this case it is no longer about simply creating different costumes, but here we can see a complete change of style. This entire style looks like a combination of Power Rangers and Star Wars, something between technology and destruction. If we compare the Star Wars characters with these photos that have this different style, we can realize that they have a very similar style. However, if we compare the Star Wars characters with the Power Rangers that we have known all our lives, we can see the big difference in style. This is how you can realize what I mean when I say that not only should they change the costumes in the new series, but they should also change the entire style. That of changing the style also includes the locations, the lifestyle, the transportation, the people around, the clothing of the general public, and many other things. If I were writing the story, I would set the Rangers in a somewhat apocalyptic time, where technology is advanced, but the world has suffered greatly. Something that all of us adult fans have criticized for years is that the Megazords always destroy part of the city, but then we don't see any destruction, and no one has died because of those giant battles. That is something quite illogical, and although we all take it as something funny, in a series created for adults this can't happen. If two giants start fighting, then that must have consequences, and those consequences must be noticed little by little. When we watch movies like Transformers, where there are giant robots fighting in the city, we can see that everything is destroyed, and those battles have catastrophic consequences. The Power Rangers can't be dealing blows with a giant robot all over the city without consequences, and at the end of the day everyone is happy because they destroyed the monster in a giant explosion that apparently didn't kill anyone. Sorry if this seems like a strong criticism of Power Rangers, but these are the things that need to change in the reboot if they want to turn everything into an adult franchise. All those battles without consequences work for a child audience because when we were 6 years old and watching Power Rangers, we didn't realize that those two giants were destroying an entire city, we only cared about the Power Rangers winning the fight. In the reboot, we adults are going to realize that all those giant battles are going to have consequences, and this should be noticed. If they start the story before the Power Rangers get their powers, then we can accept that the city still doesn't have any damage, but if they start the story after the Power Rangers have been fighting for quite some time, then there's no way they're going to show me a city in perfect condition. It's at that point that style is going to be the most important thing, since in these darker stories we should see powerful villains who have to have some victories to make the drama look more real. Only in children's stories the heroes always win. If they want to give us stories for adults, then the villains must also win, and when the villains win, the consequences of their actions are noticed. This is why if the story starts after the Rangers have the power, then they should present us with a devastated city, abandoned places, a future where life is different, and the Rangers have tried to save people, but sometimes they have not succeeded. So, it should be a real story for adults and a real story of superheroes. A great example of this is the Marvel story in Civil War, and that is where the heroes are debating because of all the consequences of their battles. There we can see the cities that have suffered due to the multiple battles, and here we are only talking about normal-sized people. Imagine all the disaster that a giant robot can cause. All these consequences should change the entire style of the series, since the typical Power Rangers costumes would not match very well with a post-apocalyptic world. Another thing to mention is that we don't know if they are going to change the style of the Rangers' powers, since for now, we have only seen that there is always something that connects them to power, and this gives the Rangers suits that give them strength, speed, and weapons. With the new style, some things could change, and, in this channel, we have already mentioned that it would be good if they would give the Rangers some different powers. A good change would be for the Rangers to be able to control elements of nature, or maybe have some powers that could make the Rangers stand out, since all Rangers always have more or less the same power. Imagine a team where one Ranger gets super strength, another gets super speed, another can control things with the mind, another is super intelligent, and in this way they would all be very different. This could help each Ranger stand out, and fans could choose their favorite not only by the color or personality of the character, but also by their power. This would change the whole style of the series, as we would have to see incredible special effects, and the tone of the series would change completely. We all know that for superhero stories weapons are very important. Even some weapons can change the course of any story and make a difference in many situations. Because Power Rangers has always been a project for a child audience, the weapons had to be colorful and had certain liberties. Some Power Rangers weapons are ridiculous to adults, but these weapons are possibly the most impressive to kids, and that's because they are somewhat creative. Since the reboot is going to be aimed at a more adult audience, then the weapons are something that should change quite a bit, and not only their design, but also their use. Some weapons look spectacular, but their use is quite unrealistic, like for example the Shark Sword, which looks spectacular, but its attack is quite crazy. This sword can stretch and travel all over the place to attack many enemies quite fast. This for a children's show is very entertaining, but for an adult show it would be a bit ridiculous. By this I don't mean that Power Rangers is something ridiculous, but that each program has its own style depending on the target audience and how much fantasy they want to give to that project. There are projects that are aimed at an adult audience and have some pretty crazy things that can be almost ridiculous, but that is precisely the style they want to give it. In this case, Power Rangers needs to be a little more serious in the reboot, because in order to be successful it needs to change some things and have a little less silly fantasy. This is the hardest part as it is quite complicated to identify what can be categorized as silly fantasy and serious fantasy. In the category of weapons, we can identify it in their design and how they are used. Weapons are something quite serious, and I think they could give a power to each one so that they can be something special. This falls under serious fantasy since a weapon having some special power is still a fantasy. A good example of a weapon that has a special power with a design that is full of fantasy but doesn't go to the extreme of being silly fantasy is Saban, the White Ranger sword from Mighty Morphin. This sword has a tiger head, has a life of its own, and at the same time is still a sword that the Ranger can use to fight like any other sword. Being a sword that he can use in battle gives it the realism it needs to be a serious weapon, but having a tiger head that can talk gives it the necessary fantasy without looking silly. In the comics, this sword is much more special as it has a great connection to the grid and can identify Rangers from other universes within the multiverse. Many have talked about how the reboot should be like the comics, and it is precisely this kind of thing that makes the comics so spectacular. They can give us enough fantasy without having to get ridiculous, and they stay on the serious side of the story. Some details of the weapons have a lot of similarity with the changes they must make with the costumes, and we all know that the weapons of each Ranger must match the costume. Previously, we had said that the colors of the costumes should start to be opaquer, with desaturated colors and a little darker. This will give a little more seriousness to the project so that it looks like a movie production for adults and not something for a child audience. Basically, this is the same thing they should do with the weapons since many of them have bright colors like the Ranger's suit, and this sometimes makes them look like toys. This has been one of the weak points of some seasons, and is that the owners of the franchise have always wanted to sell Power Rangers toys since that is where they get the most profit. Because of this, they have created weapons that already look like toys so that when they make the real toys, then they look much more like the original object. One of the most iconic seasons in this was Dino Charge, and basically almost everything in that season looks like toys. Another important thing they need to change is utilization, and I'm not just talking about the ridiculous attacks that some weapons have, but also the way a Ranger can attack. Because Power Rangers is rated for a child audience, the attacks should be simple and not look like they are taking someone's life. We got to see this change a bit in the special episode when Rocky destroys one of the monsters and uses the sword in a different way, basically trying to stick the sword in his chest. This is something you can't see in a regular season of Power Rangers, and that's why they use small explosions in each attack in order to give it a little bit of impact. Obviously, the new Power Rangers projects are not going to be R-rated, so we are not going to see attacks as gory as we saw in the Logan movie, but we are going to see more violent attacks. For now, the weapons we have seen do not cause visible damage, as the result of each attack cannot be shown as something very graphic but must be something interpretive. This means that when a Ranger achieves an attack, then two things can happen: the monster falls to the ground and complains of pain, or it simply explodes and disappears. In a project where the rating is higher, as it is going to be in the reboot, the results of attacks can be different and much more graphical. For example, some attacks may cause the monster to break a limb, it could also bleed, and they could also have a more graphic death instead of just exploding. Don't get me wrong, I love seeing villains explode and having the background music fill that moment with a super epic feel, but this has no realism to it at all. There are moments in Power Rangers that are weird regarding this, as sometimes the monster is talking as if nothing happened and then explodes without having felt anything prior to the attack. An example of this was when Tariq attacked a monster, and the monster hadn't realized anything until it exploded. In the style that Power Rangers has, this is a perfect moment since it is comic, epic, and exaggerated, but in the style that the reboot might have, this would not work. In order to understand all this, you must think that the reboot can have the same style that the 2017 movie has, which was more realistic, and its fantasy did not reach the ridiculous. The story mixes all the reality with fantasy in order to create a fictional world, but with the seriousness of everyday life. Looking at it from that perspective, then imagine a ranger attacking a monster and the monster doesn't notice anything, but 2 seconds later it explodes. This is something that would be ridiculous in a style like this from the 2017 movie, and that's why the weapons should change to have a serious design with more realistic attacks, but full of serious fantasy. One of the important parts of tokusatsu is giants and megazords, since that is what tokusatsu is all about. One day the producer of Cosmic Fury said that Power Rangers will be successful if they move away from tokusatsu, and we all think that is a mistake. One of the things that Power Rangers fans love are the Zords, and we always have that curiosity of how the Zords of each new team will look like. It is for this reason that we were all so disappointed in the 2017 movie, as those Zords had a terrible design despite having a good CGI. One of the things that was being talked about in the rumors of the plans for the first reboot with Netflix was that supposedly the Rangers were not going to have Zords, and from this topic we got a lot of theories. If this rumor had been true, then it is likely that they wanted to eliminate the Zords due to the high cost involved in creating them, and perhaps this is why they wanted to get that big weight off their shoulders. We can even think as a theory that maybe the cancellation of that first reboot was to have ideas like that and maybe other crazier ideas. The reality is that separating Power Rangers from tokusatsu is crazy, and we know that this idea was thinking of all those people who are not used to seeing giant fights. We all know that Power Rangers must reach a wider audience if they want to lift the franchise, and obviously all of this new audience are not Power Rangers fans, but this doesn't mean that they can't understand tokusatsu. In one of the episodes of the Marvel animated series, they gave us an entire episode with some elements of tokusatsu, and this has a lot of meaning. Marvel is a franchise that, despite sometimes doing lousy things, the reality is that they always have a plan for almost everything. This franchise recognizes that tokusatsu is a format that has a lot of fans, so possibly the problem is not tokusatsu. The one element of tokusatsu that Power Rangers should abandon is repetitive episodes, and they should move in the same style that Transformers has. This giant robot franchise has many tokusatsu-like elements, and although it is not categorized as tokusatsu, the reality is that the resemblance is obvious. Now we come to the key point in this whole conversation, and that is that the company that is creating the Transformers movies is Paramount. Hasbro and Paramount have been working together for a long time, since Hasbro are the owners and Paramount are the creators of the movies. It is for this reason that I have long told you several times that it made the most sense for Paramount to take over the reboot, and now we are seeing that Hasbro is taking this path. Paramount has already created giant robots, taken a franchise that was only seen by fans, and is now a franchise that has reached different audiences that have never seen Transformers before. Exactly this is what Power Rangers needs, and while many Transformers fans have said that they have changed some things from the original series, new fans know nothing about it. In the case of Power Rangers, it's a little different because, being a reboot, then the new writers have the opportunity to create something totally new and different. This means that they have a great deal of freedom, but they can't take a path where they abandon the core things of the franchise. One of these things is the Zords, as this is a fundamental part of Power Rangers, and this is why it was so important how much of an impact the 2017 designs had. I am sure that if those designs had been spectacular, it is very likely that fans would have forgotten about many other negative things that happened in that movie. Even in the 1995 movie, the CGI of the Zords was terrible, but because the design of every Zord was perfect, fans didn't care about the CGI. It goes to show that even though the CGI is important, it's really the design that's most important. Sometimes producers want to try really modern things, but there are times when the simplest thing is the best thing that works. Is it really that complicated to create an animal in the style of a giant robot? In the special 30th anniversary episode, they created the old Zords with the modern CGI and they looked amazing. This was the combination of great design and modern technology. As much as we all love those Zords, the reality is that that design doesn't work for a universe aimed at a more mature audience, so the Rangers need Zords that look fiercer and more realistic. Paramount's new Zords should have a bit of Transformers flair, but they should still look like Power Ranger-style Zords. We must remember that the Megazords are very similar to the Transformers, so they must be careful not to create confusion in the audience. We still don't know the theme that the new team will have, even we don't know if that team will have any theme since the 2017 team didn't have a completely defined theme. This is a key thing for the design of the Zord since, if the theme is animals, then the design can be something more concrete and possibly easier to achieve. The reality is that the best Zord designs in the franchise have been animal-themed, and although many fans no longer want these themes to be used, the reality is that it wouldn't be a bad idea to be able to see excellent designs without falling into the 2017 mistake. With artificial intelligence technology, we have created many designs for Zords using animal theming, and I want to introduce you to some of these designs. We must remember that these designs are unrealistic and possibly almost impossible to realize in CGI, but this is part of the beginning of an idea. We see this polar bear for the Zord the White Ranger, a perfect animal to be a Zord as it is strong and fierce. The polar bear is an animal that does not give up easily and is the biggest bear of all. In this design we can see that it keeps its animal shape, but it also has a robotic look, and at the same time it seems to have personality. Because he is a Zord that has been in many battles, his skin is full of scratches and marks from all the battles he has had. This is a very realistic detail that they should add to the new Zords, a technique they also use in Transformers. Next is the Blue Ranger Zord, a giant rhino, a powerful animal that commands a lot of respect. The skin of this animal is very tough, so one of the characteristics this Zord should have is that its metallic skin should be very tough as well. The next Zord is the Yellow Ranger Cheetah, and this is another very skilled wild animal. The cheetah is one of the fastest animals that exists in the world. This means that, if a cheetah selects you as its prey, then you no longer have a choice. In this design we can see that almost all the physical characteristics of the cheetah are maintained and only has some important details that make it a living robot. The next Zord is the Black Bull and would obviously be the Black Ranger Zord. The bull is known to be an animal that is not afraid of fights and will always keep fighting at all times. This design is quite simple in the face part, but the body has a lot of robotic details. One of the most impressive things about this design is that it looks like a real bull and not just a robot. The next Zord is the Red Gorilla, a Zord that we also had in the 1995 movie. This animal is well known for always fighting to protect his family and for being a great leader in the herd. This is the same thing a Red Ranger should do, protect his team and always be a great leader. This design is a little different from the others, and that is that his body looks quite similar to the Ranger costumes. The last Zord is the Lioness of the Pink Ranger, and we all know that this animal is always very wild. The lioness always works as a team, and in this way they manage to catch their prey. In this design we can see all the metallic parts, and the pink color gives it a very modern style. These are some designs that we hope to see with the new Zords, and it is simple to see them in a photo, but if we see them moving in a movie it will be completely different. We have only recently learned that there is going to be a reboot in the franchise, and even though the company has been making the necessary moves for this for a long time, the details have only recently started to be released. Because of this, there are many fans who are a bit confused with some details about what the reboot might be, and, in this video, we are going to explain everything we know. You must remember that some things are already official, but there are other things that are only rumors. You also must understand that there are details that are almost obvious, since due to everything that has happened in the past, we can guess what they are going to change in the future. The first thing we should talk about are the Rangers that they are going to present in this new stage of the franchise, and when a reboot is mentioned, many think that they are going to start with the same story of the mighty Morphin. Basically, this was the same thing that happened in the 2017 movie. They created the Mighty Morphin story again, but changed some details so that it could connect better with the story they wanted to tell. For now, what is known is that they are not going to tell old stories modified, which means that they are going to create a new team, a new story, and everything is going to be different. Basically, they are not going to do like the 2017 movie, but they are going to create a new team, with a new name and a new story. You must remember that the Power Rangers will now be for a young adult audience, so the stories are going to be darker, and this is why it's better to create everything from scratch. By creating a new team, they can give them a darker and more fantasy-filled starting story, which can enhance the story of the entire saga. For each team it has always been important to have a name, but for now nobody knows what will be the name of this new group. Write in the comments some possible names for the new Power Rangers team. Something important about the team is the number of members it may have, as this can be a positive or negative thing in the entire series. In my opinion, I think the perfect number of members for a team should be between 5 or 6 Rangers, as it is quite balanced. If there are very few Rangers, then we won't be able to see as much variety of powers, and there are less stories to tell because there are less important characters. If there are too many members, then it can be a bit confusing, plus there are too many stories going on at the same time. Another detail that we have talked about before is the Zords, and there was a rumor that they might not use many scenes with the Zords. This is obviously not confirmed, but it is something that makes a lot of sense and could happen. For us fans it would obviously be devastating, since the Zords are an essential part of the Power Rangers, and we all look forward to that exciting moment when the Zords arrive. If we put ourselves in the producer's shoes, we can understand that creating the Zords is very expensive, and perhaps this is the motivation for not using these scenes. Maybe they don't see it as fans, but as investors, and it is difficult to know if you are going to recover all that money that you are going to invest in creating those scenes. The normal thinking that they probably have is trying to figure out if it's worth it to create a lot of scenes from these machines. Remember that now they want to do a project with high quality, which means they can't create scenes of the Zords with mediocre CGI, and they can't create something that looks like it was made for children. You must create robots of excellent quality, and to achieve this you are going to have to use high-level CGI. To create this, they must invest a lot of money, so this is something that makes a lot of sense. Let's hope that the producers think more about the fans and not the money, because if they create something amazing, then they are going to get the support they are looking for. Another thing we know is that they're not going to create anything in 2025, basically continuing the hiatus on everything to do with Power Rangers. The excuse they've given is that franchises that have been around for many years need a pause at some point, and this supposedly helps fans not get the new material suddenly. Power Rangers has been doing basically the same thing for 30 years, so to suddenly change this may be confusing to some people. This break may be good for fans, although it may not be so good for Power Rangers content creators, as there is not as much information to give fans. Despite this, if the franchise takes a break, then they can start a new universe without the risk of fans confusing the stories with the old universe. It should be remembered that this new universe is not going to have any connection to the old universe, so the stories are not going to be able to be mixed up. Previously, Even though Power Rangers was starting a new season, the producers had the ability to mix different teams from different seasons, and this helped the story a lot. With the reboot, this is not going to be able to happen again, as the old universe and the new universe are going to be two completely different universes. Even, according to some rumors on the internet, the new universe is also not going to have a connection to the universe of the 2017 movie. That movie has no connection to the universe we have known for 30 years, and this is obvious since the characters are the same as the Mighty Morphin team, but they are completely different people. Sometimes people don't quite understand what a reboot is, so I'm going to try to explain it in the easiest way. When they are going to reboot a franchise, they just need to use the basic formula of the project, and with this they create something new that is not going to have any connection to the previous project. In the case of Power Rangers, the new project is going to have the basic things, which are the Rangers, the villains, the costumes, and the weapons. The other things can be changed since this is the basics that Power Rangers has, and although we have been used to many things, the reality is that in a reboot they can change almost everything. We are going to mention some important details that it is almost obvious that they are going to change in this reboot, and these are things that they need to modify. The first thing they are possibly going to eliminate is the silly comedy, and even in Cosmic Fury this was eliminated. Despite the changes they made in Cosmic Fury, this series is still for a child audience, and they still removed the silly comedy. If the new reboot universe is going to be for an adult audience, then it shouldn't have silly comedy either, so this is a practically obvious thing they are going to remove. Another obvious thing they should change is the costumes, and that's because we've been seeing costumes created from the same material for 30 years. We have only seen two Power Rangers teams that have had costumes created with different materials. These teams were the 1995 and 2017 movies. In the reboot, obviously the costumes need to be very different, but they can't lose the essence of what the Power Rangers are. This is going to be very important for this reboot, because if the costumes are not to the public's liking, then the production could have a lot of trouble attracting fans. Another thing that is obvious that they are going to change are the villains, as previously they could not give us such evil villains because it is a children's series, and now that it is going to be an adult series, then they can give us really evil villains. If you would like to know more about the reboot, like this video and subscribe to get to know the new Power Rangers universe.